We're leaving tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your house, but what I didn't tell you was... I said it plain as daylight on a Sunday after church, the way a decent son ought to deliver hard news. Steady voice, eyes level, no tremor. Folks will swear up and down that truth sets you free, but they never had to deal with a stubborn old saint who won't admit a two-story relic is a hazard for a woman with a bad hip and a habit of climbing ladders to dust the top of the china cabinet. That porch swing you love croaks like a dying cricket, the roof shingles curl like burnt toast, and the furnace wheezes every January, then gulps down my money like a thirsty mule. I've been the one paying the property tax when the county sent those yellow slips, the one you called when the basement backed up after the first thaw, the one who drove across town at midnight because the smoke detector chirped and you said it sounded lonely. So, yes, I found a buyer while the market is red hot and the assessor says our side of Maple Street finally caught up to the fancy people near the lake. Don't look at me like that. The spreadsheets don't lie. Ava showed me. Do you know what empty bedrooms and faded curtains earn you? Drafts in winter and wasps in summer? What they don't tell old-timers at the neighborhood BBQ is that memories don't replace joists or pay insurance when the creek jumps its banks. And Maple Pines has a shuttle, a nurse on call, bingo on Tuesdays, fresh roses in the lobby. You like roses, remember? Pastor Jim's wife said it would do you good to be around friends your own age. God bless her heart. The paperwork? It's all above board. Escrow closes Friday. The notary smiled so kindly at you, you didn't even mind the ink on your thumb. You signed the utilities release, the maintenance waiver, the affidavit about the old shed out back. That fast little page tucked between them, limited power of attorney for emergency repairs, is just to keep things moving, nothing to fuss about. The LLC on the contract? It's standard, keeps liabilities tidy. If a developer scrapes this place down to the studs and turns it into 2 townhomes, well, that's called progress. I'm not the villain here for refusing to let a creaking house swallow the last years of my life. I have a boy to put through college and a 2012 Chevy that needs a new transmission. Good sons do what fathers taught them, make hard calls, hold the line, ignore the noise. You'll thank me one day, I told you, and I meant it. You said your daddy hung that rafters beam himself, that his tobacco tin is still wedged in there like a message in a bottle. Sweet story. But a bottle doesn't patch the roof. Look, I even left you the quilts, the box of Christmas angels, that chipped coffee pot that hisses like a snake on the burner. I'm not cruel, I'm practical. I took the deed, the equity, the headaches, and the guilt so you could have safety and sunlight and card games at 3. Besides, nobody tells the whole truth in these moments. It spooks people. So when I said, we're leaving tomorrow, I didn't mention the deposit already cleared or the clause that lets us accelerate the timeline if the seller, that's you, hesitates. I didn't mention whose name is hiding behind that LLC, or how tidy it is to be both problem and solution in a county where a handshake still counts more than a lawyer's grin. Why would I? In this town, the man who moves first wins, and I moved. At least, that's what I believed as the screen door sighed and the porch swing gave one last tired creak right up until she walked into the courthouse with a fat brown folder I didn't know existed, and the bailiff said my mother's name like a bell. My name is Helen, and that boy you just heard, the one talking about progress and spreadsheets, he's my son Peter, my only child. The same baby I held through endless winter nights when his father worked double shifts at the paper mill. The same boy who used to climb into my bed after thunderstorms, whispering that he'd build me a house so big the lightning would never find us. Funny how dreams curdle when they grow up. That house he sold? It wasn't just lumber and plaster. It was 48 years of scraped knees, stitched curtains, and laughter that seeped into the floorboards. I can still smell the Sunday roast from the kitchen, hear the squeak of the screen door when my late husband came home smelling of sawdust and sweat. He built this place board by board, not for profit but for permanence. When Peter told me he'd taken care of everything, I thought he meant the gutters or the broken banister. I never imagined he meant selling the walls that had held our family together. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, sunlight bleeding through lace curtains, and watched my son shuffle papers with the cold precision of a stranger. His wife, Ava, smiled that tight, polite smile city women learn from real estate seminars. "You'll love Maple Pines, Mom," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. It's got a community garden and social nights. You won't be lonely. But I'm not lonely here. I know every creak of this floor, every bird that nests in the maple outside. I know which stair sighs when you step too hard, and which cupboard sticks in summer. These things don't make me lonely. They make me alive. When Peter slid the pen across the table, I hesitated. His voice softened, almost tender, as if I were a child refusing medicine. "Mom, please, it's safer this way." And I signed not because I agreed, but because somewhere deep down I still wanted to believe my boy knew best. For the rest of the day, I moved like a ghost through my own house, touching the edges of picture frames, the doorknobs worn smooth by years of family hands. That night, I sat by the window where my husband once read the evening paper, the lamp humming softly beside me. The garden outside was dark, but I could still make out the white picket fence he painted every spring. I thought of Peter as a little boy chasing fireflies beyond that fence, laughing so hard his knees turned green from the grass. Where had that boy gone? The man who came today carried his voice, but none of his heart. When the wind rustled the maple branches, I swore I heard my husband's whisper in it, a warning wrapped in love. "Don't let them take what's yours, Helen." Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe it was something else, something stronger than the law or the ink of a signature. The next morning when I went to dust the bookshelf, a folder slipped from between two photo albums, brown, thick, and stamped with my husband's old initials. It must have been there for years, forgotten behind the frames of our younger days. I held it to my chest, feeling the weight of it, the way paper sometimes holds more power than people expect. I didn't open it yet. Not then. I just sat back down by the window, listening to the distant rumble of moving trucks on Maple Street, and thought, if Peter believes this story ends with a sale, he's forgotten who raised him. When I finally opened that folder, the scent of old paper and tobacco drifted out the same faint smell that used to cling to my husband's work shirts. Inside were yellowed receipts, notarized letters, a few photographs, and one envelope marked for Helen, when you need strength more than comfort. My hands trembled as I unfolded his handwriting. That steady block print I hadn't seen since the day he left me in this house, with a kiss on the forehead and a promise that everything you'll ever need is already here. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it means you're standing at a crossroads, and I'm not there to tell you which road leads home. But trust yourself, you've always been stronger than you think." Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. He wrote about the small investments he'd made quietly after retirement land near the lake, stock in a construction company that had grown tenfold, even the mineral rights to a plot outside town. He'd put it all in my name years ago, hidden behind a trust our lawyers set up so the paperwork wouldn't attract attention. "This house," he wrote, "is just one root of a tree you don't even realize you own, and if anyone ever tries to cut it down, remember you hold the deed to the forest." My breath caught in my throat. My husband had never been a man of fancy words, but he was always deliberate, a craftsman even with sentences. The deeper I dug, the more I realized what he'd left behind wasn't money. It was foresight. There were letters to our old attorney, Mr. Whitmore, confirming that every document related to the trust could only be transferred upon my direct consent, never through a proxy, not even by a blood relative. The limited power of attorney Peter had slipped into those closing papers meant nothing against what my husband had secured years ago. I sat there for hours, surrounded by proof of love disguised as legal language, and the ache in my chest began to turn into something harder, cleaner, not revenge, resolve. Outside, dusk settled over the yard. The maple leaves shimmered bronze in the dying light, and I could almost see my husband standing by the fence again, hammer in hand, his shoulders steady. He'd built more than a home. He'd built a fortress that greed couldn't breach. And yet, I'd raised that boy who tried to sell it out from under me. My thoughts drifted to Peter as a child, how he used to race through the hallway in his socks, slide into my arms and ask, "Mama, are we rich?" I'd laugh and tell him, "We're rich in love, that's what matters." Maybe I should have told him more about the kind of wealth that doesn't fit in a bank ledger, about loyalty, gratitude, and legacy. Maybe then he wouldn't measure everything in dollars. That night, I didn't sleep. I brewed coffee the way I always did, strong enough to wake ghosts, and spread those documents across the kitchen table. The ink glistened under the lamp, every clause and signature a piece of armor. By morning, the first glimmer of a plan had begun to take shape, quiet and careful. If Peter thought I'd fade into that retirement home like a forgotten relic, he was about to learn something he'd clearly never understood. You don't outsmart a woman who's lived long enough to bury her pride and her husband, but not her fight. The next few days moved like a slow tide, quiet on the surface, full of dangerous pull beneath. Peter and Ava came by each morning to help me pack, their smiles stretched tight as ribbon. They spoke in that careful tone people use around children or the very old, a mixture of pity and impatience. Ava's perfume filled every room she entered, sharp and sugary, trying to cover the scent of dust and betrayal. She folded my curtains as if she owned them, humming some tune from the radio. Peter walked through the house with a clipboard, noting every item as if he were auditing a warehouse. "Mom, the movers will be here Friday," he said, tapping his pen. "We'll make sure everything important goes with you." I nodded, pretending not to notice that everything important didn't include the family photo albums or my husband's tools. I played the part of the meek old woman, the one too frail to understand what was happening, because I needed them to believe it. The longer they underestimated me, the more time I had to finish what I'd started. I spent the nights writing letters, one to Mr. Whitmore, one to the county registrar, one to a young journalist from the local paper who had once interviewed me about my husband's volunteer work. Each letter contained pieces of the puzzle: the trust documents, the property deeds, the proof of ownership that tied Peter's sale to a fraudulent transaction. By the third night, I'd typed everything out neatly, slipped each packet into an envelope, and sealed it with the kind of precision I used to save for his school lunches. By Thursday, Peter was in a hurry. "We have to sign the final closing statement, Mom," he said, his voice snapping like dry wood. "The buyer's waiting." He slid a stack of papers toward me at the kitchen table, but this time I didn't touch the pen. I looked up at him and saw the faint shadow of the boy he once was, scared, hopeful, still craving approval. It almost softened me, almost. "You should have read the fine print, son," I said quietly, turning the first page around so he could see the small embossed seal on the corner. "You can't sell what was never yours." He frowned, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "What are you talking about?" Ava stepped closer, her voice sugary and sharp. "Helen, let's not make this difficult." I stood, slower than I used to, but steady. "The trust owns this house. It's in my name. My husband set it up so no one, not even family, could touch it without my written approval." Peter blinked. "That's impossible." "I had power of attorney." "A limited one," I said, "and it expired the moment you tried to use it for profit." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, there was a knock on the door. Mr. Whitmore stepped inside, silver-haired and calm as ever, a briefcase in his hand. "Morning, Helen," he said, tipping his hat. "You called about an urgent clarification." Peter paled. "You didn't—" "I did," I said. "And the county registrar's office already has copies." Ava's voice rose, brittle with panic. "You can't do this." "We had a deal." Mr. Whitmore's eyes softened, but his tone carried steel. "The deal was invalid. The buyer has been notified, and the escrow funds will be frozen until further review." For the first time in years, silence filled the house, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that reveals every crack in a person's conscience. Peter slumped into a chair, his shoulders heavy, his pen dropping from his hand. Ava muttered something under her breath and stormed out, her heels clattering down the porch steps. I turned to my son. "You tried to save yourself from a house you said was falling apart," I said softly, "but you forgot it was built by someone who knew how to make things last." He looked up, eyes glistening. "Mom, I just wanted—" "You wanted easy," I said. "Life doesn't give easy. It gives lessons." That night, after they left, I sat alone in the quiet and finally allowed myself to cry, not for the house, but for the years it took me to see the truth. Sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just changes its shape, turns into something that has to be tested before it remembers what it's made of. Tomorrow I would go to court to finalize the nullification. But tonight, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to the creak of the porch swing, and thought about how justice, when it finally arrives, sounds a lot like forgiveness whispered through an open door. That night, the house stood silent, yet alive in a way it hadn't been for months. The movers had come and gone, hauling back the few boxes I'd sent to storage, and the smell of sawdust and old varnish floated through the air again. I opened the windows wide, letting the night breeze sweep through, and for a moment it felt like my husband had just stepped out to the porch for his evening smoke. The porch swing creaked softly, and I half expected to see his silhouette there, calm and steady as always. I made a pot of coffee strong, black, the way he liked it, and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my son had tried to sell away my life. The brown folder lay beside my cup, no longer a weapon but a keepsake. I thought I'd feel triumphant after the court hearing, but what I felt instead was an ache, a hollow, echoing sorrow for what greed had done to my own child. Justice can return your dignity, but it can't return your innocence. The next morning, a letter slid under my door. The handwriting was shaky, hesitant, but I knew it instantly. Peter. The envelope was plain, no return address, just my name written as he used to on Mother's Day cards. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single page. Mom, I don't know how to say this except that I'm sorry. I let fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. The house, the money, it all blinded me. You gave me everything, and I repaid you with betrayal. I can't undo what I did, but I'm selling the condo and paying back every cent. I need to learn what you and Dad built, that I couldn't see something stronger than walls or deeds. If you'll let me, I'd like to start again. I read the letter twice, then pressed it flat on the table. There were no tears this time, only a quiet calm. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. I folded the paper neatly and placed it inside the folder, among the other proofs of love and endurance that had carried me through. A few days later, I walked to the garden. The maple tree shimmered gold under the morning sun, its branches whispering above me. I ran my hand over the rough bark, the same tree where Peter had once carved his initials beside mine and his father's. Time had softened the letters, but they were still there, our small family etched into living wood. I picked up the old watering can, filled it from the hose, and tended the roses Ava had once mocked as old-fashioned. Their blooms were full and defiant, red as embers. That's the thing about roots. They don't ask for permission to keep living. When the mailman arrived later that week, he brought an envelope from the town hall. Inside was a notice confirming that the trust had been renewed under my sole guardianship. Mr. 1111 Herals of Dado P1 and Endo at and for her today too. Whitmore had added a final clause, per my request. Upon my passing, the property would be transferred to a charitable foundation for widows and single mothers, women who had built their lives on invisible labor and quiet strength. Peter wouldn't inherit the house, but he'd inherit the lesson. I smiled as I signed the final page, sealing it with the same ink that had once saved me. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch swing, listening to the cicadas hum and the gentle rustle of the wind through the maple leaves. Somewhere in that sound was the echo of my husband's laughter, steady and sure. The world had taken much, but it hadn't taken that. I closed my eyes, the swing rocking softly beneath me, and felt a peace that no courtroom, no betrayal, no greed could ever touch. Justice had been done, yes, but more than that, love had survived it. Autumn came quietly that year, soft as a sigh. The air turned crisp, and the maple leaves outside my window blazed red and gold, as if the earth itself were whispering that endings could still be beautiful. The town seemed smaller now, slower, but in that stillness I found a kind of grace I hadn't known before. Each morning, I brewed a single cup of coffee and sat by the window where my husband's chair used to be. The light streamed in just right, landing on the photographs that lined the mantel our wedding day, Peter's first bicycle, the Thanksgiving where everyone laughed until they cried. For weeks I couldn't look at those pictures without bitterness, but time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest edges. Now, when I saw my son's young face smiling back, I didn't see betrayal. I saw a child who had lost his way and a mother who had once believed that love alone could keep someone honest. Maybe I had been wrong, but maybe being wrong is what keeps us human. Peter called me on a Sunday afternoon. The hesitation in his voice was gentler this time, stripped of arrogance, full of something that sounded almost like hope. "Mom," he said, "I found a small place near the river. I'm fixing it up myself. No loans, no partners, just me and my own two hands." I smiled into the receiver, picturing the boy who once followed his father with a hammer too big for him. "That sounds good, Peter," I said. "Your father would like that." There was a pause on the line, then his voice cracked. "I know, Mom. I wish I'd listened sooner." When we hung up, I sat for a long while in the quiet, Forgiveness isn't a door that swings open. It's a window that you have to pry loose, inch by inch, until the air finally moves through again. A few weeks later, I attended the dedication ceremony for the Helen and Robert Thompson Foundation, the charity created from our trust. The small community center buzzed with life women chatting, children laughing, a local choir humming hymns my husband used to hum in the workshop. The mayor gave a speech about legacy, but all I could think about was the simplicity of what we'd truly built, a home strong enough to outlive its walls. When they unveiled the plaque bearing our names, the crowd applauded, but I just pressed my hand against the cool bronze and whispered, "We did it, love." For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. That night, I walked through the house one last time before heading to bed. The moonlight spilled across the floors, touching every scar on the wood, every nail my husband had driven in decades ago. I paused at the kitchen table, running my fingers along its surface. It had held more than meals. It had held confessions, laughter, arguments, and prayers. I thought of how close I'd come to losing it all, not just the house, but the meaning it carried. Greed can strip the paint off a life, but integrity quiet. Stubborn integrity keeps the frame standing. When I turned off the lamp, the porch swing creaked once, and the air smelled faintly of roses. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was faith, or maybe it was both. I lay in bed and listened to the night settling over the house, thinking of how justice, when it finally finds you, doesn't arrive with thunder or applause. It comes softly, like forgiveness. And as the first frost touched the windows, I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Robert. Thank you for teaching me that what's built with love can't be sold." Then I closed my eyes, letting sleep fold over me like the quilt he'd made long ago, warm, solid, and everlasting. If you were listening to my story tonight, remember this: houses can be rebuilt, fortunes can be lost and found again, but trust and kindness are the only walls that never crumble. Tell me, where are you listening from? And if you believe love can outlast betrayal, subscribe and stay with me for the next story here on Voices of Auntie Rose.